Building a Rubicon-capable camper van of 42s takes big strides. Between removing the motor and getting suspension system designed, today we make huge leaps forward. I was gone for 9 days on the Build for Off-Road adventure ride, which you'll be able to see on Discovery Channel and HBO and Hulu. And while I was gone, Nick has been stripping out everything that we don't need from this van. It's a good thing that Nick was here gutting this van while I was down in the Southwest, hanging out with Ian and his crew for their show, because my energy levels are absolutely shot. So I want to make progress out here, but it is going to be like low energy progress. So what we're going to do is we're going to weld the center section to the axle tubes. And I've seen these slip multiple times in the field now on multiple axles. In fact, while I was on this trip, this happened to one of the guys that was on the trip with us. So check it out. We have a spun axle tube. We use the winch on my Kodiak down through. Winch line goes down here. Yeah. Snatch block up. And we were able to straighten out one of the axle tubes with the winch. Yeah, we were able to get this tweaked back where it needs to be, and we were able to weld it all together, which is awesome. So we were able to fix that on the trail, but the idea is to not have to fix it on the trail. I have yet to see this happen to a front axle, but we're gonna weld the front axle tube, at least the one that we can reach anyway, and then we're gonna weld the rear really well, because when the nose of this van is up in the air trying to climb something, and we're really having to goose it, and the weight comes off and back on that rear axle, I do not want to worry about spinning tubes. So we're going to weld this thing up really well. We're going to make sure that we're doing it the right way, and then we're going to inspect for cracks after we let it sit for a couple days, make sure it's completely cold. I've really simplified the way that I do this over the years, and I treat everything now like it's the same. Whether it's nodular iron, cast steel, I don't waste any time trying to research to figure out what the Dana 80 came with, what the 14 bolt came with, what the Sterling came with. It doesn't matter. What I do is I heat everything up between 400 and 600 degrees, which I verify with a laser thermometer. I then stick weld it with a high nickel rod. And again, doesn't matter what it's made out of. High nickel rod works great on all of these materials. Between welds, I shot peen it with a hammer. And I don't know if the shot peening process is as valuable as everyone says, but either way, I do it. Then after I've got a complete weld on both sides of the axle, I reheat everything back up to make sure it's just even with the torch, and then I wrap it and let it cool. I don't think you need to let it cool for 24 hours or any of that kind of stuff. I think the most important part of this is doing a process like stick welding, where it's very forgiving, whether or not it's dirty. I think the shot peening probably helps, but I don't really know. I haven't had any bad results once I started stick welding with high nickel rod. And in this instance, I'm testing 2 different types of cast iron rod just to see which one I think welds a little bit smoother. And then this is gonna be the rod that I use from here on out. Not all welding rod is created equal. I bought all this, no sponsorship, none of that stuff. I believe I bought this based on somebody's recommendations in one of the comments. Nickel 99, so higher nickel content, which makes a giant difference. This is made for non-machinable cast iron. So for the nickel 99, I found it so much easier to weld, and you're never gonna get like an absolutely gorgeous weld with a stick welder. But look at that, completely acceptable. That's like what you'd see in, anything you saw like welded in a building or anything. It's gonna look like that, because they stick weld buildings. Now this other stuff, the cheaper stuff, I bought this locally. It was much more difficult to make a pretty weld. And although it's acceptable in some spots, I think I am going to grind this back down and then run some of that nickel 99 over the top. Regardless, I need to cover this one so that we don't have any cracks that's cooling, but based on the quality of the welds, I don't think we're gonna run into that problem anyway. You can definitely argue, and you'd be right, that I don't need to waste my time grinding down this perfectly good weld that's just a little bit ugly to then try to church it up and make it slightly prettier. But the reality is, in the automotive space, we get judged much more harshly on our welds, and even though this is still gonna look like a stick weld, I wanna try to clean it up a little bit. But the good news is Nick is not wasting time, and he got the engine pulled out, and I did find a buyer. So we loaded up my K-truck. We drug this engine around a public parking lot with people that I met on Facebook Marketplace, loaded in their trailer, and then I wanted to start up my old pickup truck that we're going to get the donor motor from and just drive it around and make sure it's still working after being parked for so many months. This truck still drives so good in terms of power. It even stops okay still. But with 329,000 really hard miles, the interior is absolutely falling apart. There is not a body panel on this that isn't just blistering with rust. This thing is melting in the rain, and it's going to be a very non-functional truck in the next year or two, I'm sure, if I continue to use it the way it is. But we're gonna cannibalize all the good parts out of this. What's funny is that at 329,000, that Ford has almost double the miles, 572,000, and that Ford, the body, the frame, the interior parts are holding up so much better than these old Dodges do. This is the third second-gen Dodge that I've owned, and they all kind of end up like this unless you're really on top of interior parts as they break, replacing them. So we're gonna use, this has an exhaust brake, this has a 5.9 Cummins, 24 valve high output. We've got a 6-speed manual with a 6-to-1 first gear ratio, and it's synchro, which is awesome. Dude, I love, you can miss a shift, it's still just so much power. I love these old trucks. And then we're gonna try to reuse the gears, the input gears that are going into our transfer case, stack those in front of the Ford transfer case we bought, and then use the rear disc brakes on this Dana 70 and see if we can adapt them to our Dana 80. So I need to decide whether or not I'm gonna have Nick pull this engine now or have him just start working on the wiring for the van. But regardless, I've got this kit from a company called Alpine Off-Road, and they make some van suspension stuff. This kit seems really well thought out, and I like the basic design of it, and it's like 3/8, it's heavy duty. So I'm going to start to glue some of this together, figure out where all these pieces cog together, and start working on the suspension of the van. I've got a bunch of ideas of how I want the suspension to lay out in this thing, but I really won't know how to do that until I just start to get some of the basics established, and then I can start to figure out what's going to actually be packageable. I'm using a combination of welding processes here. I'm using TIG on anything that needs to be low build, so something that's going to be on the frame side that I want to make sure it's not going to push this bracket away from the frame, and then anything on the outside is just going to be MIG. MIG is easy, it's fast, it's super hot out of this machine, so I'm using a combination in that way, just based on what kind of welding process I think makes the most sense. This is the most important part, in my opinion, of setting up custom suspension and custom axles, and that is alignment. I'm using a laser plumb bob to find a common point on each side of the frame, and then I'm making a mark on the floor. I'm then measuring between these 2 points, dividing that in half in order to find a perfect center line for the chassis that I'm also going to mark on the floor. Once I get these all marked and I get a snap line done, we're going to be able to use a line laser in order to make sure that our axles are perfectly centered in the chassis and that everything is set up exactly like we need it. Perfect. Okay, now in the back you're going to see a white mark on the floor.
See it?
We need to be as centered as we could possibly be. I got to move it over for the front one.
I see. Let me know when you're...
That's centered up here. Yeah, that's perfect up here too. All right, we are center. Look how that illuminated the whole thing now.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the other one. My friend Gunnar and I just went out and picked up some 3/8 plate that I had cut from the nearest town, has a CNC plasma service that I decided to take advantage of for this project. If you haven't worked with 3/8 plate, you use a lot of consumables. It's extremely time consuming, so this seemed like, what a weird way to sit, Gunner. He's chewing on a bone down here. Anyway, this kit from Alpine Off-Road is based around a radius arm setup, which is fine and good if you've got a van that's just going to go down like basic dirt roads and just occasionally flex. But for us, we want to actually push this van hard, and so I wanted the best performance. And later on in this video, we'll go through the difference that you're going to get out of a radius arm versus a 4-link. But I wanted to change. I just wanted to make a small change with their design to make it a 4-link kit instead of a radius arm kit. And using this local plasma cutting service saved me a ton of time when it comes to digesting such thick steel. This is the factory radius arm. This is what comes on this axle, and the way it works is it slides over these two mounts right here, and then it mounts to the frame right here, which is one bolt hole. This is nice because it's very simple, it's easy to package. It works fine for a factory F350 that's just like towing heavy and doing dump runs and all the stuff that F350s are made to do. But when you want to go off-road, there are some big disadvantages. If you just bolted this into this side, that into that side, and we wanted to try to push one side of the axle down and the other side up, it puts a ton of stress and strain in these bushings, and it really reduces your ability to easily make that motion happen. So this is a fine suspension style for someone that's just wanting to explore dirt roads, hit the occasional big pothole, that kind of thing. They're gonna have no problem with a radius arm. But there is a better way. We're using these brackets from Barnes 4-wheel drive, and these are made to work and index perfectly with the 05 and up Super Duty Dana 60s, which is what this axle's from. This is from a 2008 Ford Super Duty. So this is going to separate the upper and lower links and make it to where it's not a radius arm. The reason that that's called or I don't know why it's called a radius arm, but the reason that that radius arm isn't working as good as it could is because it's not going to allow this upper mount and this lower mount to operate separately throughout its suspension travel. And as soon as we separate this portion here, instead of having it tied together, it's going to allow this axle to twist in the way that we dictate. And we're going to dictate that with suspension tuning. And our suspension tuning is going to be done predominantly with control arm length. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have an upper control arm that is run separate and a lower control arm that is run separate. This Alpine Off-Road kit, which is really well thought out. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel or anything here. This is the mount that he has. This comes back here and mounts up to the back of our radius arm, just like that. But what I did is I went and had a local company punch out this. This is gonna mount in the same place as this did. So we're using all the rest of the Alpine Off-Road stuff. We're just changing this one tab. Our upper control arm is going to mount to this hole here, and our lower control arm is going to mount to this hole here. And what this is going to do is it's going to make it to where as the suspension goes up and down, because these are now mounted separately on two different arms, so we're now going from basically 2 front control arms, essentially, to 4 front control arms. It allows that give. And the reason I designed it like this, where the upper control arm mounts so much farther in and so much closer to the axle, is because I've built a lot of suspensions, and if you build your upper links shorter than your lower links, your axle has a much greater tendency towards staying flat and true and your caster remaining relatively unchanged as it takes those big bumps and goes through its suspension cycle. But the added bonus for us, because we are wheelers, is that whenever we go to the Rubicon on this thing, it's going to allow for much more fluid flex without binding, which is so important because it takes a lot of the stress and strain off of these, albeit giant bushings, but it takes a lot of the stress and strain off of these bushings and makes it to where everything just flows so much smoother. So it's gonna look a little funny at first, but I really believe that this is the path forward. Another added benefit is that if we use the factory radius arms, it's just bushings, Whereas whenever we're using this system, we're gonna be able to use rebuildable Heim joints, essentially. These are Enduro joints from Barnes 4-wheel drive on this side. So we're gonna have an Enduro joint there, an Enduro joint there. Hopefully, once we get everything locked in, our upper arm will be relatively close to 70% of the lower arm. We're gonna see. I had to kind of take a wild guess when I designed this, but I know that it's gonna be close enough that we're gonna be able to get it in the ballpark for something like this. The first trip that I plan on doing with this van is gonna probably be in December-ish, I hope. And that's gonna be a Patreon run, and I'm gonna be doing that with today's sponsor, and that is Onyx Off-Road. I use their software. Me and all my friends use this software to communicate back and forth when we put trips together. We send waypoints of places we're interested in. We check different terrain types by elevation. That's how I search for good snow spots. And since snow season is right around the corner, I'm spending a lot of time on Onyx right now, building out some different routes that I want to try with my friends, and very soon, hopefully in the next couple months, try with this van if everything goes smoothly. If you're interested in trying out Onyx Off-Road, use our coupon code. It helps support the channel a ton, or you can scan this barcode that's on your screen right now, and that'll take you directly to where you can do a trial membership or sign up. Thank you, Onyx, for sponsoring this video. The welding machine that I use is very powerful, and it's rated all the way up to 3/8 plate, and this is 3/8 plate, but I'm choosing to chamfer anywhere that I'm going to be welding 3/8 to 3/8, because in my experience, when you're welding stuff this thick, it helps. It helps a lot to have a chamfer to fill, and it makes it a lot easier to ensure that you're getting proper penetration with all your welds. Now, this is a big heavy van that I plan on driving freeway speeds with my family in it all the way up to the Arctic Circle. I want to make sure that these welds are solid. So that's why I'm really taking my time and considering the best method to weld everything together. And like I said, I'm doing a combination of MIG and TIG, just depending on what the use case is and where it is that I'm welding. Half of you like it when I do deep dives. The other half click off. I can see it in the analytics when I do deep dives. For that reason, I'm gonna do an explanation of this as fast as possible. So we're gonna go down the rabbit hole, but we're gonna do it quickly. So we can't explain why this suspension style is better than radius arm without talking about caster. And caster is a relationship between our upper and lower ball joint. So we want typically I shoot for about 6 degrees. We want our upper ball joint to be behind the lower ball joint at about a 6-degree angle. If we link this with the factory radius arm, which is fine, what's gonna be the result is, let's say it's the end of the day, we're bombing to try to get to camp because the sun's going down. Very normal scenario. This is gonna ride nice and soft, so we're gonna be able to do that. But what's gonna happen is we're eating potholes, and the front suspension is bouncing up and down and up and down and up and down. Our caster changes substantially with a radius arm because of the way the radius arm locks into that upper and lower joint. So we're gonna set it at 6 degrees, but then if we take a big bump and we're just like eating potholes, we could go up to like 10 degrees, 2 degrees, 10 degrees, 0 degrees, whatever, depending on the size of the potholes that we're hitting, right? What that's gonna do is it's gonna change the steering feel substantially as we're going down the road. Your input is going to be different depending on the bumps you're taking, all of that. It's not gonna feel as good. You're more likely to white knuckle it. And what I have found with building overland rigs is you want them to be the handling to be as good and for you to have as much confidence as possible. And you can drive way longer days without being near as tired because of the way you built it. So for that reason, we're gonna go with this suspension style. The upper link is 73% of the lower link. I typically like to be 70% or less. And what this does, if we didn't have this cross member the way I'd show you, we could put an angle finder on this thing and we could go full stuff, full droop, and you're gonna see hardly any change in that caster throughout it eating those bumps. And this is gonna, between that and good steering geometry, this is gonna make it to where we can take huge bumps and it feels like we're just driving down the highway. You're not gonna feel it grabbing the wheel. There's gonna be no bumps to your characteristics. So there's huge benefits there. There's obviously huge benefits in the fact that there's no binding, so it's actually gonna flex really well. And on top of that, there's something else we should talk about. Again, I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible so that I don't bore anybody. This lower link, it's nice and flat, which is going to give us phenomenal handling characteristics on the highway. It's gonna give us phenomenal handling characteristics towing or dirt roads or any of that. But if we angled this up just a little bit, we would be able to save a ton of ground clearance when we do trails like the Rubicon. So I had to make a packaging compromise here. I decided that instead of, it's gonna do the Rubicon, it'd probably do it, you know, maybe once a year it might do the Rubicon. But it's gonna be so rare that it does it. I'm willing to get hung up on some things and just winch over them in order to ensure that as I'm towing down the highway and I'm going cross country and I'm living out of this to get the Samurai from place to place, this thing is super stable, it handles well, it stops well. And I know that if I keep everything nice and flat like this, not only are my anti-squat and anti-dive numbers gonna be ultra like predictable, but it's gonna make it to where it's gonna be the least amount of white knuckling as I'm going cross country. These holes that I designed into the sides of these brackets look cool, but they're actually for utility, and each one is going to be filled with a piece of 1 3/4 tube. So what I want to do is I want to figure out ways to add cross members, specifically low slung cross members. And so what I want to do is, once we get the engine and transmission in here, it's going to be easier for me to bend a cross member up out of the way, but close enough to the transmission that it can either act as a transmission mount, or regardless, it's going to add some structural rigidity to this chassis. Because from an off-roader's perspective, one of the first things I noticed whenever we pulled all the guts out of this van was how few cross members there are and how almost all of them are on the top side of the chassis. We need some low slung cross members in this in order to make this chassis rigid enough to do the kind of off-road things that we want to do. On top of that purpose, I want to land our sliders on the outsides of these brackets. So we're going to have the sliders connect to the chassis in 4 locations. 2 of those are going to be in these lower control arm mounts, which will also serve as cross members. So because of the way we are going to connect everything together, it is going to give a ton more rigidity to this C-channel section of the frame, and it's going to make all of this work together and increase the strength overall. A lot of people would have just done leaf springs for this, and that's fine. Like, I am not someone who's a leaf spring hater or anything like that, but I have a lot of experience with both systems, leaf springs and links. And what I prefer about links is not only do you have the ability to like fine-tune things, meaning that if we don't like the way this rides, we can make some we can unbolt these brackets basically that we're bolting on, and we can change our geometry, and we can drastically change the way this vehicle handles under braking conditions, under acceleration conditions. There's a lot that you can do for fine-tuning with a coil-sprung suspension system, and I just love that about it. That we're not limited by the length of our spring and how far forward we can push an axle to the front bumper or to the rear bumper, whereas you are with leaf-sprung setups. The reality is there's a place for leaf-sprung setups, and they're a lot faster than doing it this way, but I'm very comfortable doing link suspensions, and it is, when they're done right, holy cow, do they flex wonderfully? Do they operate extremely smoothly, and are they incredibly reliable? This is a coil spring for a 2000s Chevy Suburban, and when I look at the back of this thing, it's got Suburban vibes to me as far as weight. We're hoping it's going to be approximately similar. So we're going to start here for a rear coil. The plan, and I need to spend some time actually templating brackets, but the plan is to use this bracket from Barnes 4-wheel drive to give us a place to land that coil onto the frame. And then what I think I'm going to do is I need something that is going to intersect well onto the axle side with these brackets that are on the frame side. And I mean, these brackets are just tacked together. I still have a lot more to add in order to make these brackets strong and whatnot. So bear with me. What I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spend a little bit of time cutting some cardboard, doing some different shapes, pulling some measurements of the links, and designing something that is going to be a combo bracket for control arms and to be a point where that lower part of the coil is going to land. So I think that's the next step for the suspension. I have a ton of work to do in my greenhouse today, but I didn't want to end the video without telling you about a new product that we just launched. And it is a dirt lifestyle low pressure gauge. If you are a snow wheeler or you're a rock crawler, this is for you. We're selling these for $20. We're not trying to make like a killing or anything like that. I ordered a ton of them to make sure that we can afford to do this. And I have wanted to do a pressure gauge for a few years. I have done an insane amount of research. And basically, in order to get a high degree of accuracy out of a gauge that goes to like 60 PSI, you'd need a giant gauge face. It's going to be oil filled, and we would probably end up being like 150 bucks. Because we're able to take advantage of the fact that this is for low pressure only. It is a 0 to 50, come on, focus for me. It is a 0 to 15 PSI pressure gauge. That makes it to where you have a very high degree of accuracy. You can very easily tell the difference between 4.5 PSI and 6 PSI, which is extremely important if you snow wheel like I do. And you can do it in a way that's affordable. And it's Dirt Lifestyle branded. We wanted to put our brand on it. We thought it would be kind of cool. And so you'll help support the channel that way. To be clear, this is not like a limited offer thing. I ordered a crap load of these in order to make them affordable so that everyone who buys them, like we're competitive with Amazon prices for very similar gauges. But if you want to support the channel, you can go to our website, pick up one of these. We've got winter beanies that are fleece lined that are, I promise you, the warmest beanie you will buy. They are phenomenal. So if you want to start prepping for snow wheeling like I have been, now's the time to do it. We've got all that stuff on our website, thedirtlifestyle.com. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.